Team GB's women's football team performed the divisive gesture before beating China 2-0 in a qualifying match ahead of the game's official start on Friday. Have a look at the moment.
The players take the knee, the players of GB. It wasn't known whether all the Chile players would respond. They have now.
Now, they're unlikely to be the last athletes to take the knee at these already controversial and troubled games after the International Olympics Committee relaxed their rules against protesting. With me now is Albie Amankona, co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism for Equality, who urged his party to reassess their view of taking the knee after Boris Johnson and Priti Patel, who described the move as gesture politics, were accused of stoking the fire when England players suffered racial abuse after the Euros. Attempting to separate the anti-racist values of taking the knee with the extreme anti-capitalist views of the Black Lives Matter political movement, which he categorically opposes, Albie said in a letter circulated to MPs, "Too many of us have fundamentally misunderstood the gesture, and we have not listened when those who support the gesture have explained why." And Albie joins me now in the studio. So, Albie, I appreciate your point of view. I disagree with you on it. So I want you to convince me why and how we should separate this gesture, which has so been connected to the Black Lives Matter political movement, when the Black Lives Matter political movement want to overthrow capitalism, defund the police, break up the nuclear family, and the gesture became a symbol for that movement.
All I want to persuade you to do is allow people who want to take the knee, whether or not that's at a football game, or whether or not that's in a protest, or whether or not that's in the studio. That didn't go down very well here.
No, I didn't like it.
No, well, that's fine. That's your right.
Yeah.
But all I'm trying to persuade people to do is allow others to exercise their right to peacefully protest against the injustices of racism that lots of black people face in this country and in other countries across the world. That's all.
But you think your party made a real mistake, didn't you? Because it was actually in an interview with GB News where Priti Patel refused to condemn the football fans who were booing the gesture, and she said it was gesture politics. Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, last year, he said he wouldn't take the knee for anyone. So at the top of the Tories, there seems to be quite a lot of negative feelings towards taking the knee.
Yes, I said there was a fundamental misunderstanding with the reasons why people were taking the knee. And there certainly was. I think it definitely stemmed from comments made by Tory MPs from as early as last year. But the real issue is racism, and that's what we need to tackle. And I wish we could probably move away from this topic of taking the knee. I think it's fine to take the knee. I think it's fine that you don't think it's all right for people to take the knee. But what we do have to tackle in this country is the scourge of racism. And the government commissioned a report earlier on this year, which was quite controversial when it came out. But there are over 20 recommendations in that report which no one has spoken about at all. And those recommendations, if implemented, could change the lives of millions of people in this country. And I think if taking the knee shines a light on racism in this country and the injustices that people face, seen by Lewis Hamilton earlier on this week, seen by our football team last week, and seen by black people across the country, and not just black people, Asians as well, I think that's a good thing.
But isn't it interesting, though, when you look at the taking the knee gesture and you think about other gestures that there have been in football, so for example the Kick It Out initiative, where there was absolutely no mainstream pushback because it wasn't a divisive gesture. I mean, can't you see why folk like me think actually what we need is a different gesture, and one that has absolutely no connection and isn't tainted by its connection with the Black Lives Matter organisation?
But I'll remind you that it was the footballers' choice of gesture, and I would have got behind a gesture if it was a new gesture that they wanted to create, or an old gesture which they've taken.
And by the way, I've never said that the footballers didn't have a right to take the knee. I'm personally opposed to it. I wouldn't do it myself. But also, Albie, I don't think that the fans should be condemned for booing the gesture either, because if we have a society where there is genuine freedom to express political views, then surely you say, yep, the England players can take the knee, but the fans can boo it if they don't like it. And that is true freedom.
Yes, but it's not very polite and it's not very British.
I agree with that.
I think booing our national team, calling yourself.
Well, I think it's not very polite, but I would say it's very British, though, when it comes to football. I mean, if you are a football fan and you know what football's like, I mean, they boo everyone. They boo the wives of opposing players. They boo managers. They even booed the German and the Danish national anthem.
Did you think that was acceptable?
Well, I didn't. Look, I personally wouldn't have done it. I personally wouldn't have booed the players taking the knee, but I absolutely think there's a bit of a misunderstanding about what football culture is like, and you've got quite a lot of snobby middle-class people who don't really understand football.
So was it acceptable for the England fans to boo John Barnes in 1996?
What happened there?
Well, when John Barnes came out in the Euros in 1996, he was booed because he's a black man. Was that acceptable within these realms of free speech?
Well, of course, if someone is being booed because of their race, no, I don't think that's acceptable at all.
So if they're being booed for taking a stance against racism, why is that acceptable?
But you must accept that that's a political gesture.
I don't accept.
Or it's seen by some people as a political gesture, including me.
I accept that it's seen by some as a political gesture, but it's seen by the majority of British people. They actually support taking the knee. I think the latest polling that I saw was about 56% support taking the knee, and it massively increased after what we saw happen last week. But ultimately, the issue is racism, and if there was no racism in society, people wouldn't be taking the knee. We need to be focusing on the 20-plus recommendations in the Seal report and making sure that they are implemented into the government's level-up agenda.
And you think that because the Tories are now viewed as being against the taking of the knee, or that's how many members of the public may regard the Tories as being, that actually people won't believe that they want to take racism seriously, or stamping out racism seriously? You think there's a direct correlation between the two things?
I think that there has been an image problem with the Conservative Party and race over the last 40 years. There has been. And a lot of it, earlier on, is well-founded. We've only really started to begin to find our voice on race. And then we get marred in another race controversy, maybe when we've just about gotten over what happened with Windrush. And for me, this seemed like quite an easy thing for us not to get tied up in. And we've ended up not looking very good coming out of this. We've ended up on the wrong side of the public coming out of this. And I think what I'd like to see from the government and from the Conservative Party is more proactivism when it comes to issues like racism.
It is strange, though, isn't it, that racism towards our Home Secretary seems to be accepted by certain parts of the population, and racism towards other non-white Tory ministers, because, of course, this is a very diverse cabinet.
The most in history.
Yeah, and do you not think that actually the way that the Tory party is leading, and the point that I think Priti Patel was trying to make, is they're changing society by being diverse without gestures?
I disagree. I think we have a very diverse cabinet, and I'm very proud of the diversity that we see in the cabinet. But what we have not seen are the diversity of votes voting for the Conservative Party to reflect a Conservative Party agenda which is inclusive of black and minority ethnic people in this country. What we've actually seen happen in 2019 was the vote share in ethnic minorities come down. So it's all very well and good to have this fantastic diverse cabinet, which we do, but if we're not getting the diverse votes to back it up, then maybe our policies aren't cutting through to the parts of the population that we need them to.
You must see the irony, though, in the attacks on Priti Patel from the left, including, I mean, clearly racist cartoons in the Guardian newspaper, for example, not being condemned by the left because of her political position.
I think it's completely hypocritical. I think every black Conservative has been subject to that type of racism. I know I certainly have. And I think it's totally wrong. It's very hypocritical. But equally, that doesn't mean that we turn it into this political football, because racism is not an issue of left and right. It's an issue of right and wrong. And that's why the Conservative Party has to take a tough stance on this as the demographics of the country changes. The younger demographics are more diverse, our opinions are more progressive, for lack of a better phrase, and I think the Conservative Party should get behind that.
Do you find it hard to be a young black Tory?
Not at all, Dan. Absolutely not at all. It's a challenge, but I love challenges. And I think you have to stick to your principles. And if you believe in Conservative principles, you can't pretend that you're a Labour supporter just because their views on racism seem to align with yours a little bit better.
Absolutely brilliant to have you here, Albie.
Thank you.
Amankona, who is, of course, the head of, tell me the name of your organisation, Conservatives Against Racism for Equality. Thank you so much for being here. Maybe a future Prime Minister, we will see.